topic I want to share with you all, since I believe most of you is an auditors like me, or maybe users of data analytical, is to select audit sample using the Benford flow test on data analytical tools, which is, of course, the Arbutus. In my experience, it is very useful since the condition of this pandemic has forced us to modify our audit procedures and emphasize on the offset audits and stress on the efficiency goals. Okay, we shall start now. Next slide. Let me start the presentation with the current condition of COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia. The data is gathered from WHO on 14th of February, where the COVID-19 infection has surpassed 1 million. Now it's around 1.2 million confirmed case and more than 30,000 deaths. Now, if we look at this trend, the curve is still rising. No sign is declining. Although the vaccine is already started to be distributed, but since the vaccine number is still limited, in my opinion, it will not, in short time, the business will recover. And it also means for us, the auditors, we still have to adapt and continue our current audit methods, which is more offsets than onset audits. Okay, next slide. This is the mobility restriction during COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia. The data is taken from Google Mobility Report. We can see that before the pandemic or the infection was announced in middle of March 2020, the blue line is which people mobility to workplaces or office is higher than movement to the residential area, the red line. But since the middle of March, where the first cases were found and new measures were taken, there were a significant drop in the people mobility to the workplaces, the blue line. But in reverse, there were a tremendous increase in the people mobility to residential or housing area, the red line. What does this mean? It means that the measures that were taken is effective, which is to decrease engagement in workplaces. And this means that as the auditors, we should find a way to perform audits, but we have to decrease the face-to-face interactions and performing more effective and efficient audits. Okay, next slide. And what is this pandemic impact to the internal audit organization? We can see that from the survey by the IIA, Institute of Internal Auditors, most organizations taking budget cuts or decreasing the internal audit budgets. And the second way is to decrease the human resource, decreasing the staffing or outsourcing, decreasing. Then the EY survey results in 2020 described that 46% of the internal audit organization do reprioritizing the internal audit plan to address new risks identified as a result of the pandemic, while 20% others still continue the full audit plan by performing audit through remote procedures. In this case, I can tell that my organization choose to perform a remote audit by optimizing these data analytical tools. Okay, next slide. I think this part can be skipped. It is just emphasize on the internal audit function that since this pandemic, despite being obstacle or hurdles, it can be a great opportunity for auditors. Okay, we continue to the Next slide. Now talking about audit sampling. There are several principles that should be concerned during the audit phase, especially in audit planning, which are minimum, there are three. The first is auditing standards require the use of analytical procedures during the planning stages. This is the standards given by many governing or professional bodies. And then the second, the risk-based audit approach also demands a comprehensive approach in the audit planning. And the last, that audit sampling can be statistical or non-statistical sampling. Also, we are auditors, were given space to do non-statistical, judgmental, or random sampling. In my opinion, the statistical sampling will should be considered. This is where we can use the Benford's law approach. All right, next slide. Next slide. What is the Benford law? By definition, it's an observation about the frequency distribution of a leading digits in many real-life sets of numerical data. The law states that in many naturally occurring collection of numbers, the leading significant digit is likely to be small. First, this theory was invented by a scientist named Simon Newcomb in 1881, while he was observing data from many books at a library, and he found a similar pattern, which is the first page usually were more worn than the next and the further pages. But then there is an engineer and a physicist named Frank Benford that they discovered and generalizing this theory. So until now, it's called the Benford law. Okay, next slide, please. Now, the Benford law states that there are certain portion of leading numbers in a batch of data sets, which are 30.1% is the leading number one, and 17.6% will be the leading number two, 12.5% is the leading number three, and so on. So if the person were described a bar chart, they will form a curve that peak at number one and declining smoothly until the number 9. This Benford law also consider the other leading digits, like the table present on the screen. We can see from example, the leading digit for number 1 and number 2 will be 11.39 and so on. It's all in the table. Next slide, please. But there are several requirements of this Benford law. Not all batch or data sets or numbers will follow the Benford laws. There are limitations and requirements, which are the first, the record should represent the set of facts or events. It means that when the data gathered, it should be complete, represent the whole fact. We cannot just use a certain portion of the data. In my sampling, it is proven that the more data we gather, the conformity of the Benford law will be better. And second, there should be no built-in minimum or maximum value for the data. It means that the data should be natural. There should be no range for the data. We cannot use threshold for data numbers, or we cannot use the data have a certain limit of minimum and maximum. The third, the records should not be numbers used as identification numbers or label. It means that we cannot use a sequence number like tickets or stamps. They are sequence in number. Those are not natural data. Then the Benford's law will not confirm. The fourth, another consideration is that there are more small records than the large records in the data table. So the mean should be less than median. Usually, natural data will have more large records than the smaller numbers. So in this case, the average number will be smaller than the median or the middle number. Next slide, please. Actually, in the practice, we can use this data analytical tool to analyze the data to know the mean and the median value. Now, according to Mark Degrini, professor and accountant, who perform research on Benford law application to the auditing and accounting fields, there are three categories on Benford's law used in the auditing field. The first is a primary test, which are the first digit test, second digit test, and first two digits or first order test. The second is the advanced test, which are the summation test, the second order test, scale invariance, and second order test. And the third is the associated test, which consists of number duplication test and last two digit test. I'm not discussing all those three tests since I'm also still learning it, but I can recommend to you all to read the books by Professor Mike Degrini titled The Benford Law Application for Forensic Accounting, Auditing, and Fraud Detection. Okay, next slide. And we come to the practice of how to implement Benford Law using these Arbutus tools. This is the main page of the Arbutus tools. It is quite similar, I think, with other data analytical tools. In the top of menu, there are many menus. Now, the first step is to import the data source. You can browse the directory of the file. The Arbutus can accept many general formats such as TXT or Excel file. Then the second, we define the data characteristic or database if the database have their own definition, we can use the external definition, or we can define the character manually. Then the third step is the table creation. This step will create a physical file in the computer drive, so we do not alter the source data. And it is better to filter the data first, such as the CHOA, the chart of account numbers, to exclude the non-natural numbers. Like I was said before, we cannot use the sequencing numbers in the Benford laws. Next. Now the next steps is to select the menu from the analyze menu, and we select the Benford. There will be an option box appear, the Benford option box, where we can custom the rule and select what we want to be tested with the Benford law. Here I select the GHAMT field, and I include the upper and lower bounds, number of leading digit set to 1, and this table, for example, I'm using the transaction tables, and for the CHOA, for the chart of account of 50405. And we can see the result. The next slide. Here's the result. The result display on a table. The first column is the leading digit. It is from 1 to 9. And the second column is the actual count, which is the actual data count of the proportion of Benford laws. And the third is the expected count. Then the next column is the JIT-STAT ratio, the lower bound and the upper bound. That's, according to Magni-Grini before, the Z statistic is the correct test to test whether the actual proportion or a digit differs significantly, or it's the deviation from the Benford laws. Here in front of you also given the mathematical formula for the Z statistic, the upper bound and the lower bound limit. It is quite complicated, and since I'm not a mathematician, just a user and a practitioner, if you want to know more, I suggest to recommend to read the Professor Magdalene papers. And we can see the below is the graph of the Benfords. We can see that from visual, the data is conform to Benford law. Then we can see a smooth curve here. All right, next slide. Since the leading digit one test fits the Benford law perfectly, now I want to perform another test, the second level test, which is a leading digit test one, conformity to Benford's law. So we move back in the box and we set the leading digit test 2 by change the number digit from 1 to 2 and set the output to graph. And we can see the result in the next slide. Now we can see the output graph in the screen. It's the transaction table on leading to GD test. Now we can see there are several spikes or bumps over the Benford's curve. In my example here is the leading digits of 49, where the actual count is 897, and the expected count is 798. So we can count by minus these audit samples. So 897 minus 798, the result is 99. So here we should select 99 samples of the transactions. We move to the next slide, please. And this is another example, the cash of fund transactions with a loose leading digit 2 test, and there are many bumps and spikes. So if you found cases like this, I would recommend to sample the highest spikes or highest bumps, which is around this 49 and 52. If you use the Arbutus, it is very simple. Just click over the spike bar and all the transaction will appear, and that is your audit sample. All right, next slide. Okay, I think that's all of my presentation. Here I would like to recommend some references on how to use Benford's law on the audit and accounting, like audit sampling by AI CPA, forensic analytics by Professor Mark Nigrini, Benford law application by Arno Berger and Theodore Hill, and others you can see in front of you. Okay, next slide. Maybe we can open discussion for a while. I will try to answer, and maybe if it's too technical about the Arbutus tool, maybe I would like ask for help from Mr. Yoharto. Thank you. Back to the moderator.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Yangki. Sorry for we still have people actually coming in the middle of the presentation, so we'll be giving up the this presentation recording itself too. Okay, so you're not going to miss out on any of it. So if you have any questions, do feel free to ask Pak Yangki. I'm sure he'll be happy to share on his experience using Benford. Pak Yangki, I do have a couple of questions. I think this question I asked before, early on, before everybody comes in. But what makes you use Benford law? What makes you think that is one of the tools that you want to use?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Franz. Actually, like I said, the audit sample should be either statistical or non-statistical, but it's better to provide a statistical sampling, the statistical method. So in the Arbutus, it is very easy and very practical. We can just import the data and do these Benford laws. It's quite easy.
Okay, so there's also a question from Ahmad Fashi from Ratus. How to use the result of Benford law as analytical tool, the interpretation. So basically, I think his question is, how do you interpret the result from the Benford law itself?
Yeah, thank you. Should I answer now? Actually, Benford law is a very powerful tools. Many organizations use these methods for their own interests, from tax to others business. But in my case, is I use these Benford laws to select the audit samples. There are millions of transactions in a bank. So what I do is I test on the Benford law conformity with all the data, and for the unconformity, I select it as audit samples. That is where I do a substantive audit.
Okay, there is also a couple more questions. This is from Anis Chairi. Are there minimum data observation for Benford law? I think there's another question that's quite similar. I think this is from Randy. I think how many records of data can Benford law analyze? So I think it's quite similar. So what is the minimum number of data can it read or should be reading to be effective? And what is the is there a maximum number of records that before Benford law it become ineffective?
Yes. Like is what's in the presentation, the more data is better, but you have to get a whole data, the whole data that represent the event and the fact. You cannot perform Benford law on partial data. That must be a concern.
Yeah.
In my experience, it's minimum about 1,000 data is very minimum, but you have to make sure that the data is natural, not in sequencing numbers.
Yeah, I think I will add on to that as well. I think the least amount of data that I have used Benford on is 500 records, but it's not ideal. But you can, but it's still not ideal. So the bigger the data, and it has to be natural number, as Pak Yamki has mentioned, because if it's number, for example, it is a check number and so on, then it's not useful. Check number, invoice number, you can't do that. But if it's an amount, yeah, then it's useful. Okay, so the bigger the number range, the better that the statistic will give you as well. There is a question. Oh, sorry, I'm still admitting people in. Miguel has a question for you too, Yamki. He says, sorry, I missed the start of the presentation. How long has Arbitrus been implemented in your organization? And are you doing any continuous auditing?
Thank you. Actually, it has been 3 years since we start to implement Arbitrus data analytical. And now we're thinking of developing the continuous audit program. We want to maximize the data analytical methods for the auditing. We have many queries and script, but currently is executed manually. So in the next years, we want to develop the next level of data analytical. We want to automate the queries and the reports, and we're planning to use the Arbitrus continuous audit monitorings. Yes, maybe Mr. Johannes can explain further about the software.
Okay, so we'll leave that one to Pak Yo later on, I guess. Another question. This is from Raditya. It says, how to recognize and eliminate data distortion?
I think I have tried this Benford law into many data sets, and I have reached many scientists try the conformity. The principle is the main principle is the data should be natural. If the data is natural, there will be no or minimum distortion. There will be a little bump or a spike, but that is the anomaly that we should check later.
I guess there is also another questions. This is from Andreas. By the way, thank you for all the questions. For those of you that has just come in, there's also a polling that you may want to complete as well. The question from Andreas is, should we pick another sample outside the result of Benford law analysis? Or we just use the sample from Benford data analysis result?
Yeah, first we have to choose and define what data we want to test with Benford. And if the data result is conformed with the Benford, we should move to the next level, the second digit test. That's where we can find the anomalies. So the sample, we select the anomalies.
I think it also means that Benford law, in my experience, is just one of the tools that I will use to see whether is there anything that I want to continue to audit. If the number is generally in compliance with the Benford law, then I will not proceed. Even after I've done the second digit test or the 2-digit test analysis, normally I wouldn't do that. But it is just it's just for us to help us to determine whether we should continue or not. Another question, this is from Mr. Chiang, Mr. Lim, sorry. So Benford laws not considered materiality in the selected audit sample?
Yeah, I think the materiality is from the accounting side, but this Benford law actually is mathematics formula. So we should test all the data sets, and it will prove or test the conformity with Benford. So there is no materiality.
Yeah. Let me just go back to your slides for a little bit, Pak Yangki.
Okay.
I know that you do quite a bit of tests on Benford now. And these some the tests that we normally perform on Benford, right? The primary tests. And sometimes we go into the advanced tests. So normally what we do. So which of these do you use the most? And do you have a sequence of the test? For example, you will do the first digit test, right? To look for the flows, to see whether there is in compliance with the Benford law. Do you then move on to digit 2, or do you go straight to maybe the last 2-digit test? Do you have the ordering? Or how do you determine?
The first, of course, we have to try the first digit test. It's a basic test,
right.
And mostly the data will fit. If the data is natural, it will conform the Benford law. So it will be followed with the second digit test, and mostly I found many anomaly. I found my audit sample in the second digit test, so I do not perform the other test.
Right. Okay. So going through your slides, just especially for those that have missed the beginning part, I see here that you run through the first digit test on the data, right? And this is the result that you get, and the chart below actually shows the natural curve of Benford. It says that the first leading number, digit 1, will have the highest frequency, right? And so on. And then from here, since it is quite natural, you move on. And then you change your test parameters now to include the 2 leading digit now instead of 1. So you start to move on. And you start to see there is some fluctuation now on the leading digit 49. Here, the Z ratio is 3.490. Normally what we do is that when we see a Z ratio of 1.96 and above, that's something that we say it has to be flagged out now, right? I think that's the theory of it. So anything above it. What happens if you have a Z ratio that is 1.8? Would you consider that as a potential audit sampling data?
Yeah, maybe you should see the whole chart first, the whole bar first. We select the highest or the lowest conformity. That is our priority of selecting the audit sample. We
Right.
can select all the unconformity, but it will take time and resources. So I focus on the highest and the lowest unconformity.
Okay. So like in any other tools, I think this is for everyone's understanding too, is that the more we understand the data, the more we use Benford, and the more we start to see the pattern and the trend of it, and the more informed judgment you can get out of it. So the tool is good to help you make your own judgment, I guess, what to do with it. Now, how often do you use Benford law right now, Pak Yangki? Is it on daily basis, or is this just for you to do a risk-based audit to determine what to audit on? You run through all the data set?
Yeah, it is performed on my audit assignment. Every assignment, since we have a limited time and the restriction, so we use Benford to focus on selecting audit samples. Not every day, but every assignment.
Right. Okay. I think there's another question. Oh, sorry, for those of you that also have missed a little bit, that come in a little bit later. Pak Yangki is actually an IS audit from an Indonesian, one of the Indonesian regional bank there, Bank Development Kalbar, we call it, right? That's two more questions that just come in. This is from Aizat, Pak Yangki. Can the tool determine or eliminate the duplication of data? Oh, I can answer this actually. Well, I'll leave it to Pak Yangki.
Thank you, Mr. Franz. To determine or eliminate the data, you do not use the Benford. You use the other function in auditus. The Benford is just to import all the data. Yeah. They don't care about the duplication or data. The data should be natural and imported all. To determine or eliminate the duplication, you use the other function, not the Benford laws. Is it right, Mr. Franz?
Correct. So you can either do a summarize or you do a duplicate. So normally what you do is that when you do a data analysis, you run through a few set of commands. So I mean, the objective, I think ultimately what Pak Yangki wants to do in the future is also continuous auditing, continuous monitoring. Now, if you do this manually, it does take time. But if this is a test that you think is important for Benford law to do a data duplication, summarize commands, classify, then you will definitely want to go into automation, which is scripting, because then it will pull you out any exceptions, then you can decide what to do with those exceptions. If the result doesn't throw you an exception, then it's good, then you just move on, right? One more question, this is from Ahmad Fasi. Is it possible for using more than one parameter on Benford law analysis, i.e. amount, transaction, and branches? So I mean two data set.
Yes, in one data set, but different field, I guess. It's very possible. First, you have to test the leading digits on amount, transaction, then branches. But there should be notes that maybe if the branches is a sequence number, I guess. It's not a natural number. So you can put branches as the parameter of Benford's law. It should be noted that the Benford's law will only confirm with natural numbers, not a sequence.
Yeah, I agree. I think in this case, you could actually run through on two separate data fields. You can always create a computer field to do that. But because of the branches is a controlled number, it's not a natural number. That's mean a number that's being set by human, right? We set it this and so this set up. It's not a good data set for Benford. So you could set it as a filter. So you could do a summarize first, then you use a Benford, or you do Benford, then you do a summarize on the branch number. But you can, based on two fields, but not so much on transaction and branches together in Benford. Hopefully that answered the question. You agree, Pak Yangki?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay, another one from Budi Hermawan. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. If the audit data is stored in a database, such as bank transaction data, is the use of Benford laws to determine numbers of samples still relevant? So the question again, let me just repeat. If the audit data is stored in the database, such as bank transaction data, is the use of Benford laws to determine the number of samples still relevant? If the answer is yes, what is the reason? Thank you.
Okay, since I'm a bank auditor, and I've tested many the core data to the Benford's law, and mostly of the natural, such as transaction. Transaction is considered natural data. It's confirmed with the Benford, like this, like in my slide. It is the data of the transaction. So I choose samples from that, and in the field, there I found some anomaly in this in the sample transaction. So I think using the Benford laws in banking is very effective.
Yeah, I think in database where you have a lot of number of transactions, huge volume, Benford law is really good. I think it's used more and more in the finance department as well as in the bank. Sorry, I just lost my voice again. I guess that is the last questions that we have for the day. Now, I have to apologize again for the error, sorry, the incorrect link that was sent out yesterday. We do have a lot of people that missed out on this. We do actually expecting 100 people to come in. We still have 63 people now, which is good. This webinar has been recorded. We will share with the participant that has signed up. Now, just to thank you again, everyone, Pak Yangki as well, for taking the time to share.